I waited, staring at the empty chair across from me. The table was set for two, just like always. I'd made his favorite, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and a glass of red wine. But tonight, it was just me, alone. My son Tyler had promised he'd be here, but he'd forgotten again. The silence in the house was suffocating, thick like the cold air that always seemed to creep in through the cracks in the walls. I looked at the phone in my hand. No text. No call. I tried not to let it hurt, but it did. This wasn't the first time. It had happened before. He'd been busy, always busy, and now he and Laura were off enjoying their lives, without me. I walked over to the window, the curtains pulled back just enough to see their car still parked in the driveway. Why hadn't they come in? Was I really so invisible to them now? The thought cut deeper than any knife could. Then, I saw it. The credit card statement on the kitchen counter, waiting for me like a final blow. I picked it up, my hands trembling. The total was enough to make my stomach drop. $22,000, jewelry, a trip. They'd used my card. Laura, my daughter-in-law, had taken it without asking. How could she? How could they do this to me? I blinked away, the tears threatening to fall, not wanting to let anyone see how hurt I was. But I couldn't help it. The betrayal stung in a way that was hard to put into words. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I wouldn't care. But this wasn't just about the money. This was about respect, about family, about being seen. And tonight, I knew I'd had enough. This wasn't just a credit card theft. It was the culmination of years of disregard. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but one thing was certain. I wouldn't let them get away with it. Not this time. I couldn't stay silent anymore. It was hard to forget the days when things felt right. When Tyler was little, the house was full of laughter, love, and life. I remember his little feet running down the hall, his high-pitched voice calling for me when he couldn't find his favorite toy. The smell of cookies in the oven was a constant in those years, and I cherished every moment. But after Harold passed, it all changed. Tyler and I tried to hold on to some semblance of the family we once had. I remember the quiet dinners we shared, the soft hum of the radio in the background, and how he would sit at the kitchen table, telling me about his day, asking about mine. It was simple but enough. As he grew older, things began to shift. I found myself pushing him to go out more, make friends, live his life. I wasn't going to be the overbearing mother who held him back. So, when he met Laura, I did my best to be supportive, even when I felt the knot in my stomach tightening each time she was around. She was confident, successful, and everything I wasn't. I tried to like her, but there was something about her that never sat right with me. I'd tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid, that she was just another part of his life. But deep down, I felt like I was slowly losing my place in his world. The more I gave, the more I lost. Tyler began to pull away. It was subtle at first, a missed call here, a forgotten lunch there. But as the months passed, it became clearer that I was no longer his priority. I remember the first time I felt it, really felt it. It was Thanksgiving, a couple of years ago. We'd always had dinner together, just the three of us. But that year, Tyler and Laura made plans to go to her parents' house. They didn't even ask if I wanted to join. They just told me they'd be gone. And so, I spent another Thanksgiving alone. The house was quiet, save for the crackling fire in the living room. I ate alone, my thoughts swirling, trying to hold on to the memory of what once was. Looking back now, I wonder if I ever really had a chance. If Tyler had outgrown me long before he met Laura. I didn't want to believe it, but the truth stung. I gave up so much for him, for our family. And now, it felt like none of it mattered. But it wasn't just the loneliness that hurt. It was the realization that my own son, the one I'd raised, the one I'd sacrificed everything for, had moved on and left me behind. Just like that, I was a relic of the past. Something forgotten. I shook the thought away as quickly as it came. I wouldn't let myself drown in this sadness. I had to be strong. But now, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Not after what had just happened. I remember Tyler as a little boy, so full of life and energy. The house would echo with his laughter as he ran through the halls, chasing after his toy trucks or pretending to be a superhero. He was always so curious, asking endless questions about the world around him. I spent hours with him, teaching him how to tie his shoes, how to read, how to ride a bike. Those were the moments I lived for. I was his world and he was mine. I'd sacrificed so much for him. There were days when I would stay up late, making sure his school projects were done just right, or sitting in the kitchen, preparing his favorite meal after a long day. I poured everything I had into being the best mother I could be, hoping that one day he would look back and see how much I loved him. But as he grew older, things began to change. His world started to grow beyond me. He spent more time with his friends, joined sports teams, and then, of course, there was Laura. I had tried to welcome her into our lives, tried to show her that I wasn't some threat, just a mother who wanted to stay close to her son, but there was always a wall between us. It wasn't that she was mean or unkind, but I could feel it. The distance, the subtle judgment. She was everything I wasn't, and I couldn't help but feel like she was slowly pushing me out of Tyler's life. I remember the first time I realized it. Tyler had come home from college for a visit. I made his favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with cheese, crispy bacon, and toast. I was excited to have him back, to spend time together like we used to. But when he walked in, he barely looked up from his phone. Laura had already texted him, and there he was, scrolling through messages, completely disconnected. I waited, silently. I had hoped he would sit down, talk to me, ask how I was. Instead, he rushed off to meet his friends. And just like that, the little boy I had raised, the one who used to beg me to read him stories before bed, was gone. He was an adult now, living a life that no longer seemed to need me in it. The house felt emptier every time he left. It wasn't just the physical space. It was the emotional distance that was growing between us. I had given him everything, but now it felt like he had given nothing back. I wasn't a priority anymore. I was just a memory in his life, something that no longer had a place in his present. And then came the Thanksgiving that broke my heart. I'd cooked all day, preparing a meal that I knew he'd love. I waited for him to come through the door, but he never did. I tried to pretend I wasn't hurt, but the emptiness in the house was overwhelming. It was a reminder of how invisible I had become in his life. The days that followed Thanksgiving felt like a blur. I went through the motions, but I could never shake the feeling of being adrift, untethered. It was as if my entire purpose had vanished. I thought about the sacrifices I'd made, the years I had spent building a life for Tyler, all for him to one day drift away from me without a second glance. The house had once been filled with his laughter, his energy, and now it felt like a museum, full of memories but hollow and silent. I spent hours staring at the photo on the mantel. Tyler, at 5 years old, grinning as he held up his first fish. I remember the day I took that picture. He had been so proud of that tiny catch, and I had been proud of him. We had celebrated that day like it was a huge victory, and in a way, it was. It was one of the first moments I realized how quickly my little boy was growing up, and I had tried so hard to keep up, to stay close to him. But now, looking at that photo, I couldn't help but wonder if he even remembered the joy in my eyes as I took that picture. And then there was Laura. I had tried so hard to make her feel welcome, to show her that I wasn't some overbearing mother-in-law. I tried to embrace her, but there was always something off between us. The subtle comments she made, the way she would look at me as if I didn't quite belong in their life. I noticed the way she would steer conversations away from topics I cared about, always bringing them back to her and Tyler's plans for the future, for their future. I had once hoped she would see me as an ally, but now it was clear. She saw me as a relic, something to be tolerated but not cherished. The resentment grew slowly, like a weed, creeping up on me when I wasn't paying attention. I couldn't understand how Tyler didn't see it. How could he not notice how things were changing? How could he not see me slipping away? I had spent years raising him, pouring my love and energy into his well-being, and now I was being cast aside like an afterthought. And Laura, she had taken advantage of that. She had used me, just as she had used my son to get what she wanted. The turning point came one afternoon when I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the bills. The stack of them had accumulated over the past few months. Things I hadn't paid attention to, things I'd put off because I didn't want to face reality. That was when I saw the charge on my credit card statement, the $22,000. It hit me like a punch to the gut. The jewelry, the trip, the betrayal. I felt my blood run cold as I stared at the statement. It was in that moment, with the weight of those numbers in front of me, that I knew. Laura had used my card. She'd taken what wasn't hers, not just once but for months, all while pretending to be the perfect daughter-in-law. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I felt the anger rise like a tidal wave. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the trust that had been shattered. This was the moment I realized I had to take control back. The anger was sharp, like a blade lodged deep inside me. I couldn't breathe without feeling its presence. I'd always prided myself on being a patient woman, the kind who let things slide, who kept the peace for the sake of family. But now, with that 22,000 staring back at me from the credit card statement, I realized I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I spent the night tossing and turning, the silence of the house pressing down on me like a heavy weight. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the numbers on that bill, saw Laura's face as she smiled at me, pretending everything was fine, as if I were too old, too forgetful, to notice the way she had been taking advantage of me for months. I couldn't shake the thought that she'd been playing me all along. But the hardest part wasn't the money. It was the realization that I had been blind. I had allowed it to happen. I had trusted her, thought that because she was married to my son, she would respect me. I had opened my heart, tried to embrace her, to make her feel like part of the family, and in return, she had taken what she wanted without a second thought. My son, the one I had raised, had stood by and watched it happen. I sat in the kitchen, the sun just beginning to rise outside. The quiet was deafening. The weight of the betrayal still hung in the air, and I knew it was time to do something about it. I couldn't sit back and let this go any longer. I wasn't just fighting for the money. I was fighting for myself, for the years I had spent giving, sacrificing, loving. I had been a good mother, a good grandmother, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. I picked up the phone. My hands shook, the weight of what I was about to do sinking in. I had spent so many years avoiding conflict, keeping the peace, and now I was about to confront the very woman who had slowly stolen my place in my own family. I dialed her number, my heart racing in my chest. It rang 3 times before she picked up. Hello. Her voice was warm, casual, as if nothing had changed, as if she had no idea what was coming. Laura, I said, my voice steady, though I could feel the tightness in my chest. We need to talk. There was a pause on the other end, a slight hesitation. What about? I know what you did, I said, my words cutting through the air like ice. I saw the charge on my credit card, the 22,000 in jewelry, a trip. You used my card without asking, without telling me, and I've had enough. The silence that followed was heavy. I could almost feel her scrambling, trying to figure out what to say, what excuse she could offer. You don't understand, she began, but I cut her off. No, you don't understand, Laura, I said, my voice harder now. I've spent my life taking care of my family, and this is how I'm treated. Like I'm some fool who doesn't notice. I could hear her breath catch on the other end, but I wasn't done. I trusted you, and you took advantage of that trust. I'm done being used. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could almost hear Laura's mind racing, trying to come up with a defense, a way to talk her way out of this mess. But I wasn't giving her the chance anymore. This wasn't just about a few swiped purchases. It was about my dignity, my family, and how little respect I had been given. I can explain, she finally said, her voice trembling slightly, but I wasn't interested in her explanations anymore. No, Laura. There's nothing to explain. You took what wasn't yours, and now you're going to answer for it. I said, my voice firm, cutting through the tension that hung in the air. I felt my hands tremble as I set the phone down for a moment, staring at the credit card bill still sitting on the counter. My stomach churned, but there was something else there now, too, a feeling I hadn't had in a long time. It was the stirrings of power, of reclaiming control over my own life. I wasn't going to let this slide, not anymore. Look, Maggie, she said, her voice softening, trying to use the old tactics she knew worked. I didn't mean to upset you. Tyler and I, we thought it would be okay. I didn't want to stress you out, and I thought you'd be happy we were treating ourselves. I swallowed hard, the hurt rising in my chest again. She thought I'd be happy she used my hard-earned money to live a life of luxury, while I sat alone, forgotten. I forced myself to breathe, steadying my shaking hands as I replied, You didn't treat me, Laura. You used me. You saw me as an easy target, someone you could take advantage of because I'd never fight back. Well, you were wrong. There was a long pause, and I could hear the faint sound of her breathing, as if she was weighing her options. I was done waiting for her to make excuses. I was done letting her manipulate the situation. "You're right," she said finally, her voice losing some of its earlier confidence. "I shouldn't have used your card. But, Maggie, Tyler and I are just trying to make things work. We're just trying to live a comfortable life." I cut her off, my voice steady but resolute. "You don't get to justify it. Not anymore. I trusted you, and you took that trust and used it to fill your own pockets. You don't get to act like I'm the problem here. I've been nothing but kind to you, and this is how you repay me." Another silence, this time heavier. I could hear the faint sound of her sobbing on the other end, but it didn't soften me. The tears were just another act, another way to manipulate me. "I'm going to take legal action," I said, my words sharp and final. "I don't care how uncomfortable it makes Tyler or how upset it makes you. This is not how family treats each other. This is theft, Laura, and it's time to face the consequences." There was a long pause before she finally spoke. "Maggie, please." I hung up before she could finish. I sat in the silence of the house, the weight of what I had just done pressing down on me. Hanging up the phone with Laura had been easy. It was the next step, the one I was about to take, that felt harder than anything I'd done in years. But as I sat there, the anger was slowly being replaced by something else. Something stronger. Resolution. I couldn't let this go. I wouldn't. I stood up and walked over to the desk where I kept all my important papers. Tax returns, bills, and old photos. Everything I had worked for, everything I had built with Harold. My hands rested on the desk, the cool wood beneath them grounding me. I wasn't the woman I had been a few years ago. I had lost so much, but I still had my voice, my strength, and it was time to use both. I picked up the phone again, this time dialing the number for a local attorney. It felt surreal, like I was stepping into someone else's life. Someone who took control, someone who fought back. When the phone rang and the receptionist answered, I pushed the fear aside. "I need to speak with someone about a legal matter," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the anxiety swirling inside me. "I've been the victim of fraud, and I need to understand my options." After a few minutes on hold, I was transferred to a lawyer named Daniel McMillan. He was polite and understanding, asking the necessary questions as I explained what had happened. As I talked, the reality of it all began to sink in. My daughter-in-law had used my credit card for months, spending thousands on luxury items and vacations. The worst part, she had done it all under the guise of being the good daughter-in-law. "I can help you with this," Daniel said, his voice firm. "We'll start by freezing your accounts to prevent any further transactions. Then, we can look into recovering the stolen funds." His confidence was a balm, soothing the raw edges of my nerves. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I had someone on my side, someone who understood what was at stake. "Thank you," I said, my voice a little quieter now, a little less sure, but I knew this was the right decision. This wasn't just about getting my money back. It was about taking control of my life again. I hung up the phone, my heart still pounding. The hardest part was yet to come. The conversation with Tyler. I had no idea how he would react, no idea if he would believe me or take Laura's side. But one thing was certain. I couldn't let this go without confronting him. I had to make him understand the depths of what she had done. As I sat down at the kitchen table, I thought about the last time Tyler had been home, how we had sat at this same table, how he had seemed so distant, so removed. He wasn't the boy I had raised anymore. I didn't know when it had happened, but somehow I had lost him. But now, I would fight for him. Fight for us. I wasn't going to let Laura destroy everything I had built, and I wasn't going to let her take my son from me. I picked up the phone again, dialing Tyler's number. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity. My heart pounded in my chest, each ring digging into the tension building inside me. I had already made the decision. I couldn't sit back and wait for Tyler to figure it out on his own. This time, I was going to make him see the truth. I wasn't going to keep hiding behind my fear of losing him. Not again. Finally, Tyler's voice came through the line, that familiar warmth in his tone that used to make me feel safe. "Hey, Mom," he said, like everything was normal, like nothing had changed. "Tyler," I said, trying to keep my voice even, though it shook in ways I couldn't control. "We need to talk." There was a slight pause, and then I heard a shuffle on the other end. I could tell he was trying to shake off whatever he was doing, trying to focus on me. "What's going on, Mom?" I took a deep breath, my fingers trembling as I gripped the edge of the counter. I found something, I said, my voice tightening. I found the charges on my credit card. Laura's been using it, without my permission. She's been spending thousands of dollars. Tyler. I could feel the air between us shift. I could hear his sharp intake of breath. What do you mean, Mom? You've got to be mistaken. His voice was too quick, too defensive. I knew he didn't want to believe it. I'm not mistaken, I said, my voice stronger now, more resolved. She's been buying jewelry, a vacation to Paris, all with my card. She never asked me for permission, and she never told me a thing. I paused, waiting for him to say something, anything. But the silence on the other end was deafening. I don't know what you're thinking, but Laura wouldn't do that, Tyler finally said, his words edged with disbelief and something else, maybe a little anger. She's not like that, Mom. She's been nothing but good to you. I felt a pang of hurt, sharp and raw. Good to me, I whispered. She's been taking advantage of me, Tyler. I trusted her, and you didn't even see it. You didn't even notice how she's been using me, taking from me. All the while, you've been telling me how lucky I am to have her in my life. The words hung heavy between us. The truth, as painful as it was finally out in the open, but it was like a wall had gone up on his side. I couldn't reach him. Mom, this is ridiculous, Tyler said, his tone shifting. Laura wouldn't steal from you. She's been nothing but kind, and you're just making this all up. Maybe you're just stressed. You've been under a lot of pressure lately, and I'm sure you're confused. My blood ran cold at the words. Confused. How had it come to this? How had he become so blinded by her, so caught up in her web? I'm not confused, Tyler, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of sorrow and frustration. I'm not making this up. And I'm done being the one who's always expected to turn the other cheek. You need to understand what she's done. She's been lying to you, manipulating you. And it's time you saw it. There was silence for a long while, the kind of silence that hurt, the kind that made you question everything you thought you knew about the person you loved most. I need you to think about this, I said softly. I'm not the one who's in the wrong here, Tyler. I'm just trying to protect myself. I'm trying to protect us. Tyler's voice broke the silence, quieter now, almost uncertain. I don't know what to say, Mom. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for what was coming next. But I knew one thing. This conversation was far from over. The conversation with Tyler ended in a heavy silence, neither of us knowing how to move forward. I had said my piece, but his disbelief, his refusal to see the truth, left me with a sinking feeling in my chest. He didn't understand. He didn't want to understand. For the next few days I waited. I waited for a call, a text, something from him that said he was processing it all. But nothing came. The quiet in the house felt suffocating, and every time I passed his room, the emptiness gnawed at me. I had raised him. I had loved him with everything I had, and now it felt like he had been pulled away from me. Lost to her, to Laura. I tried to go about my days, but the anger and hurt simmered under the surface, leaving me restless. I kept thinking about the old days, when it was just the two of us, when I was everything to him, and he was everything to me. But now, with Laura at the center of his world, I felt like I had no place in his life. Not anymore. Then, 3 days after our conversation, Tyler showed up at the house. His face was drawn, his expression distant, like he was carrying a heavy weight. When he walked through the door, I felt a pang of hope, but it quickly faded as he walked past me without a word, heading straight for the kitchen. Tyler, I called out, my voice thick with emotion. He turned to face me, and for the first time in days, I saw something in his eyes, something that looked like guilt. Mum, he said quietly, running a hand through his hair. We need to talk. I nodded, my heart racing. This was it. He had to understand now. This wasn't about a few purchases or a stolen card. This was about betrayal, about family. Sit down, I said, pointing to the chair at the kitchen table. He hesitated but finally took a seat, his eyes avoiding mine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke, the weight of everything hanging in the air between us. I don't know what to think, Mom, Tyler finally said, his voice low. I want to believe you. I really do. But Laura, she's never been like that. I can't even wrap my head around it. I sighed, trying to keep the frustration from my voice. Tyler, I know it's hard. But you need to understand. She's been manipulating you, using me, and you never even saw it. How can you defend her after what she did?" "I'm not defending her," he snapped, finally looking up at me. "But you don't know her like I do. She's always been there for me, always supportive. I don't know how to reconcile this." I leaned forward, my hands shaking slightly. "You need to see what's in front of you, Tyler. This isn't about her being supportive. This is about me, about your mother. For years, I've watched you drift away from me, and now, it feels like you've chosen her over me. She took from me, Tyler. She took what was mine, and you didn't even see it." The words hung in the air, a painful truth that Tyler wasn't ready to hear. But I couldn't stop. I had to make him understand. "I've spent my whole life taking care of you," I continued, my voice cracking. "And now, I'm the one who's forgotten. I've been a mother to you for years, and all I've asked for is respect. But now, I don't even know who you are anymore." Tyler's eyes filled with something that almost looked like regret. But it was quickly masked by confusion and frustration. "I need time to think," he muttered, standing up abruptly. "Time?" I asked, my voice shaking. "How much time do you need? You've had all the time in the world to see the truth. It's right in front of you." Tyler turned away, his face hardening. "I'm not ready to deal with this right now, Mom." And just like that, he was gone again, leaving me in the same empty house, the same silence. The days following Tyler's visit dragged on like an endless stretch of gray. The house felt colder, emptier, each room a reminder of what once was. I went through the motions, cooking, cleaning, tending to the garden. But nothing could fill the void left by my son's absence, emotionally if not physically. His visit had been brief, his words painful. I had thought he'd come back to me, but instead, he seemed further away than ever. I couldn't stop replaying his words in my head. "I need time to think. I'm not ready to deal with this right now, Mom." I'd heard them, but I hadn't believed them. How could he not see what was happening? How could he not understand what Laura had done? She had stolen from me, stolen from us, and yet all Tyler could say was that he needed time. Time to process. Time to figure things out. It was maddening. All these years, I had been there for him, loved him unconditionally. And now I was the problem, the one who was wrong. I spent the next few nights sitting in the quiet of my kitchen, staring at the same empty chair where Tyler had sat just days before. I had always prided myself on being the strong one, the pillar of the family, but now I felt weak. I felt invisible. I tried to focus on the things that used to bring me comfort. The smell of fresh flowers in the garden, the soft click of my knitting needles as I worked on the scarf I had started for Tyler. But even the simple, soothing tasks felt hollow. Every stitch, every bloom, reminded me that my relationship with him was unraveling, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I knew what I had to do. I had made my decision. It wasn't just about confronting Laura or getting back the money she had stolen. It was about taking control of my own life, my own future. I was tired of being treated like I didn't matter. I was tired of waiting for Tyler to come around to see the truth. I stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the living room, picking up the phone. It wasn't time for Tyler, not yet, but it was time for me to take action. I dialed the number for Daniel McMillan, the lawyer I had spoken to earlier. My hands were steady now, my mind clear. I wasn't going to sit by and let this go on. I was going to take back what was mine. The phone rang once, twice, before he picked up. "Mr. McMillan," I said, my voice firm. "It's Maggie Anderson. I'm ready to move forward." He sounded relieved, almost as though he had been expecting this. "Good. We'll get started right away. Let's take back what she owes you." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Thank you." As I hung up the phone, a strange sense of calm settled over me. I wasn't waiting for Tyler anymore. I wasn't waiting for permission, for his approval. I was taking control. For the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. I wasn't going to let this betrayal define me. I wasn't going to let Laura tear my family apart. And most of all, I wasn't going to let anyone, no matter how close they were, make me feel small. The morning light filtered softly through the kitchen window, casting a gentle glow over the space. But for the first time in weeks, the warmth felt distant. The house was still, too still. I had spent the last few days settling into a strange new routine. There was a quiet resolve in me now, a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in years. I had always been the one who held everything together, kept the peace, made sure things ran smoothly. But now, I wasn't going to be that person anymore. The person who quietly accepted being dismissed, the one who always put others' needs first, even when it meant being invisible in my own life. It was time to take action. Time to confront Laura, face to face. I didn't know what to expect. Part of me was terrified. The thought of facing her, of looking into her eyes and telling her what I knew, felt like a weight that threatened to crush me. But another part of me, the part I hadn't recognized in years, was ready for this, ready to stand my ground, ready to fight for myself. I had arranged the meeting for later that afternoon, choosing a quiet cafe in town. It was neutral ground, a place where no one would overhear us, a place where I could finally get some answers. And more importantly, a place where I could let her see me for who I was. Not just Tyler's mother, not just someone she could take advantage of, but me. A woman who had spent a lifetime raising her child, sacrificing her own needs for the good of the family. I wasn't going to let her erase that anymore. As the hour approached, I found myself pacing the living room, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. What would I say? How would she react? The questions churned in my mind, but I silenced them. I couldn't afford to be unsure now. I had already made my decision. It was too late to back down. I slipped on my coat, the weight of it grounding me in the moment. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror. My silver hair, the lines around my eyes, the gentle curve of my shoulders. I saw a woman who had endured so much, but I also saw strength. Strength I hadn't fully realized I still possessed until now. Driving to the cafe, I tried to focus on the road, but my mind kept wandering. I thought about Tyler, about the way he had pulled away, the hurt I had seen in his eyes when I had told him the truth. I thought about everything we had been through, about the love we had shared, and how it had slowly been replaced with something else: distance, disconnection, and now, betrayal. I pulled into the cafe parking lot, the engine ticking softly as it cooled. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and stepped out of the car. This was it. I was done waiting for things to fix themselves. I was going to confront this head-on. As I walked into the cafe, I saw Laura already sitting at a table near the back. She was looking down at her phone, her posture relaxed, like nothing was wrong, like none of it mattered. I approached the table, my heart pounding in my chest. "Laura," I said, my voice firm but calm. She looked up, startled for just a second before her face settled into the usual mask. "Maggie," she replied coolly, her smile barely there. "I wasn't sure if you were coming." I sat down across from her, locking eyes. "I'm here," I said, my voice unwavering. "And we need to talk." I sat across from Laura, the weight of what I was about to say settling heavily between us. Her cold smile was all too familiar, polite, distant, as if we were two strangers meeting for the first time. But I wasn't a stranger. I was her mother-in-law, someone who had given her the benefit of the doubt, someone who had opened her home and heart, only to be used. I leaned forward, my hands resting on the edge of the table. "I know what you did," I said, my voice steady but firm. "You used my credit card. You spent over $22,000, jewelry, a vacation, things that weren't yours to take." For a moment, Laura said nothing. She just blinked, her expression briefly faltering, but only for a split second. She quickly recovered, her mask back in place. "Maggie," she started, but I cut her off, not giving her the chance to deflect. "No. Don't try to explain this away. I've seen the statement. I know everything." I reached into my purse and pulled out the credit card statement, sliding it across the table toward her. She hesitated before glancing down at it, her face betraying no emotion. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she finally said, her voice cool, almost rehearsed. "I thought you'd understand. You've always been so generous with us, with Tyler and me. I thought this would just be a little treat, something to make up for all the stress we've been under." I shook my head. "Generous? You took advantage of me, Laura. And I've let it go on for far too long. You thought I wouldn't notice, didn't you? But I did. Every single penny." Her eyes flickered with something, a flash of guilt, maybe, but she quickly masked it with a smile, her usual defensive charm creeping back in. "Maggie, please. You don't understand how hard things have been. Tyler and we've been struggling. The bills, the housey, it was just a way to escape for a little while. I didn't mean to hurt you." I almost laughed, but the bitterness that rose in me kept the sound at bay. "Struggling," I repeated. I've been struggling, Laura. For years. I raised my son. I took care of him. I sacrificed everything for this family, and this is how I'm repaid. By being robbed. Her gaze shifted almost uncomfortably as she met my eyes. I didn't mean for it to hurt you. I didn't think about how it would affect you. Honestly, it was a mistake. A stupid mistake. A stupid mistake? I repeated, anger rising. No, this was deliberate. You took from me. You lied to me. And you thought I was too old, too soft to fight back. You thought you could just use me and get away with it. Well, you're wrong. Laura opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't want to hear her excuses anymore. The damage was done. The years of pretending everything was fine, the constant smiles and polite conversations, they were all a lie. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence settle in. I'm done, Laura. You can keep playing your games, but not with me. You've crossed a line that can't be erased. For the first time since she'd arrived, Laura's expression softened, but it wasn't the soft expression of apology I had hoped for. No, it was the soft expression of someone caught, someone who had just realized they had pushed too far. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But the words didn't feel genuine. They felt like a last-ditch effort to salvage something. But it was too late. You're not sorry for what you did, I replied quietly. You're sorry because you got caught. The silence between us stretched on, thick and heavy. Laura's apology hung in the air, but it felt hollow, empty. Her words were nothing more than a last attempt at saving face, a shield to protect herself from the consequences of her actions. I didn't know what I had expected from her, but it certainly wasn't this weak apology. She wasn't sorry for the betrayal, she was sorry because she was caught. I sat there, looking at her, and for the first time, I really saw her. The woman who had stolen from me. The woman who had quietly distanced my son from me, all while pretending to be the loving, supportive daughter-in-law. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was disgusted. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge of the table. You don't get to be sorry now, Laura. Not after everything, not after what you've done. You've stolen from me, from our family. And you think a simple apology will fix it. Her eyes dropped to the table, avoiding my gaze, but she didn't speak. She knew what I was saying was true. You've ruined everything, I continued, my voice colder now, more controlled. You've taken from me in ways I can't even describe, and now you want me to forgive you, just like that? I don't think so. I could see her hands tremble slightly, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of something, regret, maybe, but I pushed it away. I couldn't afford to soften. Not now. I'm done with your excuses, I said, my words final, resolute. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about respect. It's about trust. And you've lost both. I stood up slowly, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me. I'm going to press charges, Laura. I don't care how you feel about it. I don't care how Tyler will react. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about what's right. And you need to pay for what you've done. Her face went pale at my words. She opened her mouth to say something, but no sound came out. Her lips trembled as she struggled to find the words, but I didn't give her the chance. I'm going to talk to my lawyer, I said, my voice steady but heavy with the weight of my decision. I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen again. I turned toward the door, but then I stopped, looking back at her one last time. And you will stay away from my family, Laura. You've crossed a line. I won't let you manipulate me anymore. Not after everything you've done. She stared at me, wide-eyed, her expression a mixture of fear and disbelief. But I wasn't done. I wasn't going to be the person who stood quietly by anymore, letting everyone walk over me. I wasn't that woman, not anymore. I walked out of the cafe, feeling a sense of power and finality that I hadn't felt in years. It was over. The weight of what I had just done settled heavily on my chest as I walked away from the cafe. The air outside was sharp, biting at my skin as I stepped into the parking lot, but it didn't seem to matter. I had done what needed to be done. The decision to confront Laura, to finally stand up for myself after all these years, was one I couldn't take back. But as I drove home, the aftermath began to settle in. I had expected to feel relieved, empowered even, but instead, I felt a mix of emptiness and dread. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the unraveling of everything I had built. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life, but the path ahead wasn't clear. I didn't know what would happen next, how this would affect my relationship with Tyler, or if Laura would make good on her threats. The closer I got to home, the more the reality of my actions set in. I had confronted Laura, but Tyler had been my main concern all along. How would he react to all of this? I had already seen his defensiveness during our last conversation. He wasn't ready to believe me. He hadn't even given me a chance to explain the depth of Laura's manipulation. And now, I had thrown a bomb into the middle of their marriage. What if he blamed me? What if this destroyed our relationship forever? I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a moment, the engine running, the sound of the car's hum filling the otherwise quiet night. My eyes drifted to the house, to the empty space where Tyler's things used to be. It felt like I was living in a stranger's home. I hadn't felt truly seen in so long, and I wasn't sure if anyone would ever truly see me again. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back. Not now. I took a deep breath and grabbed my purse, stepping out of the car and into the cold night. I wasn't sure if I could handle the fallout, but I knew I had to face whatever came next. Inside the house, the quiet pressed in on me, the way it always did after a long day. But tonight, it felt different. The air was thick with expectation. I could feel the tension of the past few days weighing on me, like a cloud that refused to lift. I sat at the kitchen table, picking up my phone and staring at it for what felt like an eternity. I had told Tyler everything. Now it was up to him. I had no idea how he would react, but I couldn't hide anymore. I was done pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. The phone buzzed in my hand, breaking the silence. My heart skipped a beat. Tyler's name flashed on the screen. I took a steadying breath before answering, my fingers trembling. Mom. His voice was quiet, tentative, like he wasn't sure what to say next. I'm here, I said softly, trying to steady the shaking in my voice. Mom. Tyler's voice sounded smaller than usual, hesitant, as if he wasn't sure how to approach me anymore. My heart clenched. The weight of what I had done was beginning to settle in, and I could hear the cracks in his tone. It had been so long since I had heard that vulnerability in his voice. I'm here, I said, my voice calm but strained. I felt my stomach twist with nerves. I had made my decision. Now, I had to face the consequences. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he spoke again, his words slow, as if he were choosing them carefully. I've been thinking about what you said, he started. And I don't know, Mom. I don't know what to believe. I swallowed hard, trying to keep the emotion from taking over. You don't have to believe me, Tyler. But you need to hear me. I'm not making this up. Laura used my credit card without my permission. She spent thousands of dollars, and I'm not just talking about a few purchases. She went to Paris, bought herself jewelry. It's been going on for months. I could hear his breath catch on the other end. I can't believe it. He muttered. I can't believe she would do something like that. I closed my eyes, the pain of it washing over me again. I wish I didn't have to tell you this. I wish you could see it yourself. But I couldn't stay silent anymore. Not when it's affecting me. Not when it's affecting you too. You're right, Tyler said after a moment, his voice quieter now. I've been so wrapped up in my life, in my own things. I didn't see it. I didn't see how much she was taking from you. I felt a flicker of something, regret, realization, in his words. But I wasn't sure it was enough. It wasn't just about his blindness to her behavior. It was about the years of distance, the way he had slowly turned away from me, and the way I had let it happen. Tyler, I said gently, trying to keep the sharpness from my voice. I've been here for you for your whole life. I've been there for you every time you needed me. But you've changed. You've let her change you. And now, I'm the one who's left to deal with the consequences of her actions. There was silence on the other end. I could practically hear the gears turning in his mind. I don't know what to do. Mom, he finally admitted. I feel torn between you and her. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make it right. I could hear the desperation in his voice, and it broke me. He was still my son, still the boy I had raised. But in that moment, I saw how much he had been manipulated, how deeply Laura's control had seeped into his life. I wanted to reach out, to pull him close, to make everything better. But I knew that was no longer my place. You have to make your own decisions now, Tyler, I said softly. You're an adult, but just know that I'll always be here for you. But I can't stand by and let this go anymore. I'm doing what I need to do to protect myself, and I can't apologize for that. I get it, Mom, he whispered, his voice breaking. I'll figure this out. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'll try. I promise. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I hope you do, Tyler. I really do. The phone call ended with an uneasy silence that lingered long after I hung up. Tyler had promised to figure it out. But those words felt hollow, like something said to placate, not to resolve. I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that, despite his apology, he was still torn between me and Laura. And in the end, I wasn't sure if he would choose me, the mother who had raised him, or the woman who had cleverly weaved herself into his life. I sat there for a long time, the quiet of the house pressing in on me. My thoughts kept swirling back to that moment when I had stood up to Laura, when I had finally demanded the respect I deserved. It had felt empowering then, but now the aftermath felt like a deep, aching void. Was it worth it? Was pushing Tyler away worth making sure Laura faced the consequences of her actions? I couldn't lie to myself. I didn't know. The last few days had been an emotional roller coaster. I had confronted Laura. I had told Tyler the truth. But now, as I sat in the silence, I realized that I couldn't predict where this would all lead. I had thought the hardest part was the confrontation, but the real struggle was going to be dealing with the fallout. The emotional toll was already eating away at me, and I hadn't even begun to see how deep it would go. I got up from the kitchen table and wandered around the house, my steps heavy on the wooden floor. It was hard not to feel like I was losing everything, my family, my peace of mind, my sense of place. Even the house felt wrong now, as if it were no longer a home, but a reminder of everything that was slipping through my fingers. I stopped in front of Tyler's old bedroom, the door ajar. His things were still there. Clothes strewn across the bed, a stack of books piled on the desk, the guitar he hadn't played in years resting against the wall. It was the room of a boy who had grown up but never fully left. It was still his room, and yet it felt as though he had abandoned it. Abandoned me. The tears I had held back for so long finally started to fall, hot and unrelenting. I hadn't expected to feel so alone in my own home, to feel so forgotten by the one person I thought would always be there for me. But even as the tears flowed, a small part of me knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. I had finally stood up for myself, finally demanded something for once, and despite the pain it brought, it was a step in the right direction. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the woman who stood quietly in the background, waiting for things to get better on their own. I wiped my eyes and took a deep breath. I wasn't going to let this break me. Not now, not after everything I had already been through. I heard the sound of the doorbell ringing, a sharp reminder that life still went on. I wasn't sure who it was, but for the first time in days, I stood up straighter, my shoulders squared, ready to face whatever came next. The doorbell rang again, more urgently this time, pulling me from my thoughts. I wiped the last of my tears away quickly, trying to steady myself. I wasn't in the mood for visitors, but there was no ignoring it. I took a deep breath, smoothed my sweater down, and walked to the door. When I opened it, I wasn't prepared for the sight of the person standing on the other side. Tyler. His face was a mix of exhaustion and determination, and there was something else there. Something I hadn't seen in a long time. A kind of vulnerability that made my heart ache. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice unsure. I think we need to talk." I stood frozen in the doorway for a moment, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to pull him into a hug, to apologize for the pain I'd caused him, but the other part of me, the part that had fought so hard for the respect I deserved, knew I couldn't just let him walk back in, like nothing had happened. "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let him in. My heart was racing. This was the moment where everything could either fall apart or start to heal. Tyler stepped inside, glancing around the house as though he was seeing it with new eyes. I didn't know what he was thinking, what was going through his mind. After everything that had been said, I motioned to the living room, and we both sat down on the couch, the air between us thick with unspoken words. "Mom," he started, his hands restless in his lap, "I've been thinking a lot about everything you said. He stopped himself, exhaling deeply, as if the words were getting stuck in his throat. "I'm sorry, Mom. For not seeing it, for not being there when you needed me. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. My emotions swirled again: relief, guilt, pain, and a hint of hope. I had expected him to be defensive, to justify everything, but here he was, acknowledging the hurt I'd been carrying for so long. "Tyler," I said softly, feeling my throat tighten. "This isn't just about the money. It's about how I've been treated. How I've been ignored, made to feel invisible, by both you and her. I'm not blaming you for everything, but you've let it happen. You've let her change you. And I don't know if I can fix this, but I needed you to understand." He nodded, his eyes downcast, and I could see the weight of the realization hitting him. "I'm sorry for all of it, Mom. I let her take over. I let her push you out. I didn't even realize it was happening." I swallowed hard, the rawness of the moment settling in. "I don't want to lose you, Tyler," I whispered, the tears threatening to spill again. "I've spent so many years giving everything to this family, to you, and now, it feels like I've lost you." Tyler reached out then, his hand resting gently on mine. "You haven't lost me, Mom. I promise. I need some time to figure out how to fix it." I nodded, the flicker of hope in my chest growing stronger. Maybe there was a way forward after all. Maybe we could rebuild, slowly, but surely. Tyler left my house that evening with a promise. He would talk to Laura. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the guilt and confusion, and I hoped, more than anything, that he was finally ready to confront the truth. I didn't know what would come of it, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could start rebuilding what had been broken. The following day, Tyler called. I could tell by the sound of his voice that something had changed. He didn't even say hello. Instead, the words came rushing out fast, almost as if he couldn't hold them back any longer. "I talked to her," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I told her everything. I told her about the credit card, about everything you said. And she's denying it, Mom. She says you've misunderstood, that you're mistaken about the charges. She says she never used your card without permission." A sharp chill ran through me, and I felt the familiar sting of betrayal rise again. Of course she would deny it. Of course she would twist the truth to protect herself. I had expected it, but hearing it from Tyler, hearing him say it like it was somehow my fault, felt like a slap in the face. "I told you she would do that," I said, keeping my voice steady, despite the frustration building inside me. "She'll never admit it, Tyler. She'll never take responsibility for what she's done." "I know, Mom," Tyler said, his tone softer now, as if he were trying to comfort me. "But it doesn't make sense. I've seen the way she spends money. I've seen her splurge on things. But this feels different. She's convincing me, and I can't just ignore it." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words settle in. He was still torn, still under her spell, in a way. I had hoped that by confronting Laura, by showing him the truth, he would see through her lies. But now I saw just how deep her manipulation had gone. "You need to trust me on this, Tyler," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "Laura has been using you. She's been using me, and you've been so focused on protecting her, you haven't seen it. She's been lying to you, twisting everything to make it seem like I'm the one in the wrong." There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought maybe he would argue with me again. But then he spoke, his voice quieter now, with a tone of resignation that I hadn't heard before. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he admitted. "I don't know who's telling the truth." The words cut deeper than I expected. I had hoped, so desperately, that Tyler would stand by me, that he would see the truth in my eyes. But instead, I was left with nothing but doubt. Doubt in his judgment, doubt in her, and doubt in myself. "You'll have to figure it out, Tyler," I said softly, feeling the finality of it all. "But know this, I've given you everything. And I'm not going to stand by and watch her tear us apart." The next few days dragged by in a haze of uncertainty. Tyler hadn't called back. Laura hadn't reached out either. I spent my time in the same quiet house, the silence growing more oppressive with each passing hour. I could feel the weight of the choices I'd made pressing down on me, but I didn't regret them. Not yet. It was Friday when I received a text message from Tyler. I stared at the screen for a moment, my heart racing, unsure what to expect. "Can we talk?" It wasn't a question I had wanted to answer so soon, but it was the moment I had been waiting for. I had no idea what he was going to say, whether he had come to his senses or whether Laura's version of the story had taken root in him. Either way, I knew I had to face it. I couldn't keep avoiding the conversation. I texted back, my fingers shaking as I typed, "I'll be home." Within an hour, Tyler was at the door. His face was drawn, his eyes tired and full of conflict. As he stepped inside, I could see the heavy burden he was carrying. His shoulders were slumped, and there was a distance in his gaze, a distance that seemed to widen with every step he took toward me. "Mom," he began, his voice thick with emotion. I talked to Laura again. I gave her a chance to explain everything. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I couldn't hide the frustration bubbling inside me. After everything, he was still giving her a chance to spin her lies. But I forced myself to remain calm. He was still my son, and he needed to find his way, even if it hurt. "She says it's all a misunderstanding," Tyler continued. "She swears she didn't take the card without permission. She says she used it to surprise me, that she thought you'd be okay with it." He paused, looking at me with eyes that seemed to beg for reassurance. I took a deep breath, trying to keep the anger from flooding out. "Tyler," I said quietly, "this isn't a misunderstanding. I know what I saw. I know what she did. And if you keep letting her control the narrative, you'll never see the truth. You'll never see how she's been manipulating you, how she's been using both of us." "I want to believe you, Mom," Tyler said, his voice breaking. "But I'm not sure I can trust either of you anymore. You and Laura. You're both saying things that don't add up." I stood up, my hands clenched at my sides. "I've spent my whole life giving to you. I've made sacrifices, and I've put my family first. And now, I'm telling you the truth. But it's like you're blind to it. I've been invisible in this house for so long, Tyler, and I'm not going to let that happen anymore." He flinched, as if my words had stung. "I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know what to do. She's my wife. I don't want to lose her. But I also don't want to lose you." I felt a lump rise in my throat. This wasn't the conversation I had envisioned. I had expected him to choose me. I had hoped he would see how far Laura had gone, how much she had taken, not just from me but from him as well. But here we were, caught in a stalemate, each of us unwilling to give up what we held dear. "You don't have to choose, Tyler," I said softly, "but you do need to open your eyes. This isn't just about Laura. This is about us, about family, about the trust we've always had. You need to decide what kind of man you want to be, and who you want by your side." He looked at me, his face torn between guilt and indecision. I need time, Mom," I nodded slowly, my heart heavy with the uncertainty that lay ahead. But at least now, the silence between us was no longer complete. We had started to talk, and that, for me, was a start. The days that followed Tyler's visit felt like the quiet after a storm. The house was still, the air thick with unspoken words, and for the first time in a long time, I found myself unsure of what came next. Tyler had left with his promise to think things through, but I knew in my heart that there was no quick resolution. Not anymore. I had spent years letting my world revolve around my family, around Tyler and his life. But now, I was standing on the precipice of something new, something that scared me more than any confrontation ever could. The prospect of building a life for myself, one that didn't rely on the approval or presence of anyone else. That realization hit me one afternoon as I sat in the living room, absent-mindedly flipping through an old photo album. The photos of Tyler as a boy, his wide smile frozen in time, stirred a mix of love and sorrow. I missed those days, those moments of closeness. But it was clear now that I had been living in the past, trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. I closed the album, setting it down with a quiet thud. There was no use in clinging to what could never be again. The world had changed. My relationship with Tyler had changed. I had changed, and while it was painful, it was time to accept that. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, my steps echoing in the silence of the house. I had no idea what I was supposed to do now. My hands hovered over the phone on the counter, the urge to call Tyler, to hear his voice one more time, strong, but I resisted. He needed his space. He needed to figure things out on his own. And so did I. Instead, I grabbed my keys and decided to take a walk. The day was crisp, the sunlight warm despite the chill in the air. It was the kind of afternoon that made you want to forget everything and just be. I didn't know where I was going. Just away from the house, away from the weight of everything that had happened. I walked through the neighborhood, my mind slowly clearing with each step. The leaves crunched beneath my feet, the sound oddly comforting. As I walked, I thought about the years I had spent building this house, this life. How many times had I put myself second, put my own needs on hold for the sake of everyone else? The truth hit me like a wave. I had forgotten who I was. Somewhere along the way, I had lost myself in the roles I played, mother, wife, caretaker, but I was still here. I was still Maggie, and I had every right to reclaim the parts of me that had been buried for so long. I kept walking, the sun sinking lower in the sky, painting the world around me in warm hues of orange and pink. It wasn't just about finding my way back to Tyler, it was about finding my way back to me, and no matter how hard it would be, I was ready. The walk had helped. By the time I returned home, the sharpness of the pain had dulled, replaced with a quiet resolve. The evening air still clung to my skin, but it no longer felt oppressive. As I opened the door to the house, I felt something shift inside me, like a weight had been lifted, not entirely, but enough to allow a breath of fresh air. I stepped into the kitchen, where everything was as I had left it. Neat, orderly, the faint scent of the roast chicken I had made earlier still lingering in the air. It felt odd, this stillness. For so long, my life had been dictated by others' needs. I had forgotten what it felt like to live on my own terms. But now, as I stood there in the quiet of my own home, I knew that had to change. I walked to the window and looked out into the yard. The garden that Harold had helped me plant was still there, the roses blooming in the fading light, a reminder of all the years we had spent together. It was a small comfort to see something enduring, something that hadn't changed despite everything else. But even the comfort it brought me couldn't mask the fact that everything had shifted. I thought about the future, about what it would mean to live alone. And as much as it hurt, I realized that living in the past wouldn't bring me peace. I couldn't keep waiting for Tyler to come back to me, to make everything right. He was a grown man with his own life, his own choices to make. And Laura, well, Laura was a complication I didn't need anymore. For the first time in a long time, I felt something else. Anger. Anger at how I had let myself be sidelined for so long, anger at how I had let others dictate my worth. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't some relic of the past. I had a life, and it was time to start living it. The thought of making changes, of standing up for myself in ways I never had before, was terrifying. But it was also liberating. I didn't need to wait for permission. I didn't need to wait for Tyler's approval or Laura's apology. I grabbed my phone and dialed Daniel McMillan's number again. This time, there was no hesitation in my hand. I was done waiting. "Mr. McMillan," I said when he answered, my voice firm. "It's Maggie Anderson. I'm ready to move forward with the legal action. I want to file the fraud report." His voice was steady, reassuring. "Of course, Mrs. Anderson. We'll start the process right away." The moment the words left my mouth, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This was the first real step I had taken in months to reclaim my life. I wasn't sure where it would lead, or what the consequences would be, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something for me. I hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle in around me. Whatever happened next, I was ready. I was no longer a bystander in my own life. The days after I made the call to Daniel felt like a slow but necessary unraveling. I had taken the first steps towards something that could change everything. But as the legal process began to move forward, I couldn't help but feel the weight of what I had done. Tyler still hadn't reached out. Not after our last conversation. I had hoped, perhaps naively, that once the dust settled, we could rebuild, slowly, surely. But each day that passed without him, the truth became clearer. I had no control over his decisions. No matter how much I loved him, no matter how much I wanted to be a part of his life, I couldn't force him to see the truth. I couldn't make him choose me. I spent the days tending to the garden, cleaning the house, filling my time with things that kept me busy. I didn't want to face the hollow feeling that crept in when I allowed myself to think about the future. The emptiness of the house was a constant reminder that the family I had spent years building was slipping through my fingers. But there was something else there, too, something stronger than the fear. It was the quiet power of knowing that I was finally taking control of my life. The decision to confront Laura, to call her out for what she had done, was not an easy one, but it was the right one. I had taken my life back into my own hands, and that in itself felt like a small victory. The phone rang one afternoon as I was pruning the roses Harold had planted. My heart skipped a beat when I saw Tyler's name flash on the screen. I wiped my hands on my jeans before answering, my palms suddenly damp. "Mom," Tyler said, his voice sounding different than it had the last time we spoke. There was no defensiveness this time, no tension, just exhaustion. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I've made a decision. I'm going to confront Laura." I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "I don't know how to fix this," he continued. "But I need to know the truth. I can't keep living in the middle of all this. I need to understand what's going on, what she's done, and I need to do it for myself." I exhaled slowly, letting the weight in my chest release, but only a little. "Tyler," I said, my voice steady, "I'm proud of you for seeing it, for understanding. It's not easy, but it's the first step toward finding your way back to what really matters." "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words heavy with meaning. "I've failed you. I didn't see it. I didn't protect you. I'll fix this, I promise." "Thank you," I said softly. "I know you will." The conversation ended with a quiet finality, but something had shifted. Tyler was starting to see through the web Laura had spun, and maybe, just maybe, he was finally waking up. As I put the phone down, a quiet hope bloomed within me. There was still so much work to be done, so much healing, but this was the beginning. Tyler was finding his way back, and I was finding mine. The days after Tyler's call felt like they belonged to another lifetime. I had expected a dramatic change, a shift in the air, but instead, things settled into a quiet tension. Tyler had made the decision to confront Laura, but that didn't mean everything was suddenly going to fall into place. The journey ahead was still uncertain, and while I held onto a flicker of hope, it was tempered with the reality that not everything could be fixed in a single conversation. I spent the days that followed focusing on myself, on reclaiming the parts of my life that I had let slip away for so long. I cleaned out the closets, rearranged furniture, and finally packed away Harold's old clothes, each action marking a small step toward healing. There was something cathartic about decluttering, about physically removing the things that had held me back. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about making room for the future. I started taking long walks again, something I hadn't done in months. The cool air of the early mornings was invigorating, and with each step, I felt more in control. I would wander down to the lake that Tyler and I had visited so many times when he was younger. The water was still, the trees surrounding it beginning to turn their autumn shades. It was the kind of place that made me reflect, made me see the beauty in the small moments, in the quiet peace that had once filled my life. But as much as I tried to distract myself, my mind kept returning to one question: what now? I knew Tyler was trying to figure things out, trying to make sense of everything. But with each passing day, the uncertainty weighed heavier. The confrontation with Laura was inevitable. He had to face her. He had to see the truth for himself. But the question lingered: how would he handle it? Would he believe her lies again, or would he finally understand what she had done? That afternoon, as I was sitting by the window, watching the trees sway in the breeze, I saw a familiar car pull into the driveway. My heart skipped. "Tyler," I stood up quickly, smoothing my hair down as if it would somehow prepare me for what was about to unfold. Tyler knocked gently before entering. His face was pale, his eyes tired, but there was something else there, something I hadn't seen before, a quiet determination. "Mom," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. I talked to her. And I found something. I need you to hear it from me." My heart began to race, but I nodded, urging him to continue. He took a deep breath before sitting down, avoiding my gaze. She admitted it. She admitted everything. The money, the lies, and everything else. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was quickly followed by a deep sadness. The reality of what had happened, of the deception, hit me harder than I expected. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Tyler whispered, his voice breaking. "I should have believed you sooner. I should have seen it." "I know, Tyler," I said softly, reaching out to touch his hand. "But you're seeing it now. And that's all I ever needed." Tyler sat there for a long moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air between us. I could see the raw emotion in his eyes, the regret, the guilt, and beneath it all, a deep sadness. He had spent so much time protecting Laura, defending her, even when I had been screaming for him to see the truth. But now, here he was, finally admitting what had been so clear to me from the start. "I don't know what to do with all of this," he said, his voice tight. "How do I even look at her the same way again? I don't know who she really is anymore." I placed my hand on his, the gesture meant to comfort, though my own heart was still raw. "Tyler, this isn't just about what she did. It's about how you see yourself in all of this, too. You've spent so much time trying to protect your life with her, with what seemed like the easy way out. But it's not about her anymore. It's about you, and about us." His eyes lifted to meet mine, searching for something in my face. Answers, forgiveness, understanding. I wasn't sure what I could give him in this moment, other than the truth. "Tyler," I said softly, "I know you're angry with yourself right now. I can see it in your eyes. But this isn't just on you. It's on both of you. But now, it's time to take ownership of it and move forward. Whatever that looks like." He nodded, swallowing hard, his throat tight with emotion. "I don't want to lose you, Mom, but I don't know if I can stay with her. I can't even look at her the same way." The words were raw, heartfelt, but they were also the words of someone who had been trapped in a lie for too long. The uncertainty was still there, but there was clarity in his voice now, a step toward understanding. I knew this wasn't going to be easy for him, and I had no answers for him. Only that the path to healing had to start with truth. "I don't know what you need to do, Tyler," I said gently, "but you've already taken the hardest step by facing it. You've admitted it, and that's the only way forward. Facing it, no matter how hard it is." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything settling between us. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes. But the fact that we were talking, that we were facing this together, made all the difference. Tyler finally stood, his hands trembling as he reached for my shoulders. "I'll make things right, Mom." "I will. I know you will," I said, my voice steady, though I felt the tears well up again. This was the turning point. The moment we could begin again, even if it meant walking a difficult road. As Tyler left, I felt the smallest spark of hope flicker inside me. It wasn't the end of the journey, but it was a beginning. The weeks after Tyler's revelation felt like a new chapter, though one that was still being written. It wasn't a sudden transformation. There were no grand gestures or immediate fixes. But there was progress, however small, and that was enough for me. Slowly, the tension in the house began to lift, and for the first time in a long time, I found myself breathing a little easier. Tyler hadn't come back to live with me, but we had begun to rebuild our relationship, piece by piece. He would stop by more often, sometimes for a meal, sometimes just to sit in silence together. I knew he wasn't ready to fully heal, but seeing him try was a balm for the wounds I had carried for so long. For the first time in years, I felt like I was getting some of my son back. But it wasn't just Tyler that I was trying to rebuild, it was myself too. After years of living in the shadows of my family, of sacrificing my own needs for the sake of others, I had to figure out who I was again. I had to remember that I was more than just someone's mother or wife or grandmother. I was Maggie. And Maggie had been pushed to the side for far too long. I started taking long drives on weekends, exploring parts of the state I had never seen. There was something soothing about being alone with my thoughts, with nothing but the road stretching out ahead of me. Sometimes, I would visit small towns, take walks through quiet parks, or sit in a local cafe, reading the newspaper while sipping on a cup of coffee. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was freedom. I also decided to make some changes to the house. I wasn't ready to sell it yet. Harold's memory was too deeply tied to it for that, but I knew I had to make it my own. The living room, which had once been full of Tyler's toys, was now a space for me. I rearranged the furniture, bought new curtains, and even painted the walls a soft, warm color that made the room feel lighter. Each small change brought a sense of ownership, a sense of reclaiming what had always been mine. This house, this life, was still mine, and I was no longer going to let anyone, Laura, or anyone else, make me feel like I didn't belong here. I had earned this. And then, one morning, as I sat by the window with my coffee, I realized something I hadn't fully processed before. I was no longer waiting. I wasn't waiting for Tyler to come back, for Laura to apologize, or for anyone to validate my existence. I was living for me, and that feeling, though strange and new, felt like a quiet victory. There was still so much ahead. The legal process was slow, and the fallout from Laura's actions would continue to ripple through our lives. But I was ready. I was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that I had built this strength inside myself. I wasn't alone anymore. Not really. I had me. And that was more than enough. The days blurred together as the legal proceedings progressed. I had made my decision, and there was no turning back. It wasn't easy. Nothing about this process was. But I kept reminding myself that I was doing it not just for the money, not just for the justice, but for my peace of mind. It wasn't about winning or losing, it was about reclaiming my life. I was starting to feel a shift within myself, a sense of clarity and confidence that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But each day felt like a step towards something better. Something real. I had come to terms with the fact that I couldn't force things with Tyler. I couldn't make him see things my way, no matter how much I wanted him to. I had to let him find his own path, even if it meant he needed to distance himself from me for a while longer. But I refused to let that stop me from living my life. I had spent too many years waiting for other people's approval, too many years waiting for a version of my son I could no longer hold on to. Now, I was learning to live for myself, not for the validation of others. Tyler had been by a few times in the past few weeks, visiting briefly but not staying long. I knew he was conflicted, torn between his loyalty to his wife and his growing sense of guilt toward me. I couldn't blame him. The situation was complicated, and I had never expected him to pick sides. But every time we spoke, there was something new in his voice, a shift toward understanding, toward realizing what had been taken from both of us. I wasn't waiting anymore. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat outside on the porch, a glass of wine in my hand, watching the sky turn purple and pink. The sound of crickets filled the air, and for the first time in a long time, the stillness didn't feel oppressive. It felt peaceful. I wasn't sure how I got here, to this place of acceptance, but I was here now, and that was enough. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel and turned to see Tyler's car pulling into the driveway. My heart gave an involuntary skip, but I forced myself to stay calm. He stepped out of the car, his expression unreadable. But something had changed in him. The anger, the defensiveness that had clouded his face before, had softened. "Mom?" he said as he approached, his voice tentative but kind. "Can we talk?" I nodded, setting the wine down on the porch railing, my hands suddenly clammy. This wasn't just another conversation about her, about Laura, or about money. This was something else, something deeper. We sat down on the steps, side by side, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were on the same level. No walls between us, no pretense. Just two people trying to navigate a broken relationship. "I've been thinking about everything," he started, his voice low. "About what you said, about everything Laura did, about how I let it all happen. I'm so sorry, Mom. I see it now. I see what I couldn't before. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know what I was supposed to say. I just knew that hearing him say it, the words I had been waiting for, felt like a weight lifting off my chest. Maybe, just maybe, we could begin again." The days that followed Tyler's visit were filled with a quiet anticipation. He had apologized, and for the first time in a long time, I could see the genuine remorse in his eyes. But the truth was, I wasn't sure what came next. Could we rebuild what had been lost? Could I trust him again? And could he truly confront the woman who had manipulated him for so long? A few days after our conversation, Tyler called me, his voice steady but filled with a mix of determination and uncertainty. "I'm going to talk to Laura," he said. "I need to face this, for myself. I can't keep pretending it didn't happen." I felt a surge of hope. Maybe this was the breakthrough we both needed. But there was a part of me, deep inside, that feared this might be the beginning of the end. The thought of Tyler and Laura's life crumbling felt like a betrayal in itself. But I knew this was the only way forward. He had to see the truth for himself, just like I had. Tyler had scheduled the conversation with Laura for that evening. I spent the hours leading up to it doing something I hadn't done in a while, simply existing. The house, still and quiet, no longer felt suffocating. I sat on the porch with a book in my lap, the evening sky painted in soft pinks and purples. The weight of the past few months felt a little lighter, but it wasn't gone. Not yet. When Tyler returned that night, I saw the change in him immediately. His shoulders were slumped, and his face was drained of color. He had been through something something that had shaken him to his core. But despite the wariness in his eyes, there was something else there, a sense of clarity. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I did it. I talked to her. And I don't know how to feel. But I know one thing for sure. I can't stay with her. I don't know who she is anymore." His words hit me like a wave, flooding my chest with a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because I had feared he would make excuses for her, that he would defend her actions again. But sadness too, because of what he had lost, the relationship he had with Laura, the life they had built together. It was all falling apart, and there was no going back. "I'm sorry, Mom," he continued, his voice cracking. "I should have seen it sooner. I should have protected you." I could see the pain in his eyes, the regret, but I also saw something else. Strength. He had made a hard choice, a painful one, and in that moment, I realized that it wasn't just about confronting Laura. It was about confronting the truth within himself. "You don't have to apologize to me, Tyler," I said, my voice gentle. "I'm just glad you're finally seeing it. This is hard, I know. But you're doing the right thing. For you. For both of us." Tyler nodded, his eyes filled with unshed tears. "I don't know what comes next, Mom. I don't know if I can fix things with you, with Laura. But I'll try. I want to make it right." I reached out, pulling him into an embrace. It wasn't a perfect solution, and it wasn't the end of our journey. But in that moment, I knew that we were on the path to healing. We had both taken steps forward, even if they were small, shaky steps. "We'll figure it out," I whispered, one step at a time. The days after Tyler's decision were quieter than I had expected. He moved out of the house he'd shared with Laura, and while there was no fanfare, there was an unmistakable sense of relief in the air. I could feel the tension starting to ease between us, but there was still so much left unspoken. So much damage had been done, not just by Laura, but by time and distance. We had both let too much slip away. Tyler stayed with a friend for the first few days after the split, needing space to process everything. I understood, but I couldn't help but miss him. The house felt empty again. His absence, the one I had been so used to when he was grown and off living his life, felt different now. It was like a hole had opened up, and I wasn't sure how to fill it anymore. But at least he was taking the first step toward healing. That was all I could hope for. It was a week later when he called me, his voice unsteady but determined. "Mom, I'm coming over. I need to talk." I'd heard those words before, but this time, there was something more behind them. It wasn't about confrontation anymore. It was about understanding, about reconnecting. And that was the hardest part. Not the confrontation with Laura, not the legal battles. It was this. Rebuilding a relationship that had been strained for so long. He showed up on my doorstep that afternoon, carrying a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. I opened the door before he even knocked, and he gave me a tight smile, his eyes still tinged with exhaustion. He had that familiar look again. The one he used to get when he was a teenager, coming home after a long, difficult day. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice rough around the edges. "Hey, sweetheart," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. "You okay?" He nodded, though the weight of everything still hung over him like a storm cloud. "Yeah, I think so. I just needed to come here. I needed to be here with you." I could feel the weight of his words. He didn't need to say more. I knew. The rift between us had been so wide for so long that it felt like a gulf. But now, with every conversation, every small action, we were starting to close the distance, bit by bit. He dropped his bag on the couch and stood there awkwardly for a moment, not sure where to start. I could see him searching for the right words, and for once I didn't push. He had to do this in his own time, at his own pace. "I don't even know where to start, Mom," Tyler admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what I've done or what I should have done differently. But I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. I messed up. I let things go too far." I smiled softly, sitting down beside him. "We all mess up, Tyler. It's how we move forward that matters. What matters is that you're here now, and that you're trying to make things right." He sighed, the tension slowly draining from his shoulders. "I just want things to go back to normal, Mom. I want us to be us again." I looked at him, my heart heavy with the years that had passed, but also full of hope. "We'll get there, sweetheart. It'll take time, but we'll get there." Tyler stayed for a few hours that afternoon, and we talked more than we had in months. At first, the conversation was slow and tentative, with Tyler hesitating, unsure of how to navigate the space between us. But as the afternoon wore on, it felt as though the walls that had grown between us over the years were slowly starting to crumble. It wasn't instant. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. He told me about his time with Laura, how things had been before everything unraveled. He spoke of the pressure he felt, the guilt of not being able to make her happy, the way he had convinced himself that ignoring the cracks in their relationship was easier than facing them. His words were heavy, raw, and it made me realize just how deeply he had been affected by everything that had happened. I didn't see it, Mom. I didn't see how much I was losing. I thought I could keep everyone happy, keep her happy, keep you happy, and I didn't think about myself, or you, or us. Tyler's voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw him not as the grown man trying to hold everything together, but as my son, the boy who had once run to me with scraped knees, the boy who had looked at me like I was everything. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I swallowed it back. "You don't have to carry all that guilt, Tyler," I said softly, reaching out and placing a hand on his arm. "You've been through a lot. We both have. But you don't have to do it alone anymore. We can figure this out together." He nodded, a small, grateful smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. But I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He wanted to believe that we could rebuild what had been lost, but I knew how hard it was for him to trust again. Trust in me, trust in Laura, trust in himself. As the evening approached, Tyler stood up, stretching. "I think I need to head out," he said, his voice quieter now, more thoughtful. "I've got some things to work through. But I just wanted to thank you, Mom, for being here, for understanding." I stood with him, my hands resting on his shoulders. "You don't need to thank me. I've always been here, and I always will be." He gave me a tight hug, the kind that held more meaning than any words could express, and I felt a surge of emotion swell in my chest. It wasn't the happy ending I had once imagined, the family I had hoped to have, but it was something else, something real, a beginning, a chance. As Tyler left, I stood in the doorway, watching him get into his car and drive away. I felt a bittersweet emptiness, but it wasn't the same as before. It wasn't the crushing silence of being ignored, of being invisible. It was the space for something new to grow. The foundation of a relationship that could be rebuilt, not by pretending things hadn't happened, but by facing them head on and choosing to move forward. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was losing him. I felt like we were both finding our way back to each other, one step at a time. The next few days were a mix of quiet reflection and small, tentative steps forward. Tyler still hadn't moved back in, and I could sense that he was trying to carve out space for himself, to figure out what life looked like without Laura, without the illusions he had lived under for so long. I respected his need for space, but I could also see the weight of his choices hanging over him, the emotional toll of everything that had happened. But there was something else in the air now, something I hadn't felt in months: hope. For the first time in so long, it felt like things were possible again. Maybe the damage couldn't be undone, but the path ahead no longer felt so dark. I spent the next few days focusing on myself. I started going back to the gym in the mornings, something I hadn't done in years. The physical exertion felt good. It cleared my mind and gave me a sense of control over something. I also began reaching out to old friends, reconnecting with the women I had once met for coffee or dinner, the ones I had pushed away because I had been too busy playing the role of mother, wife, and caregiver. It was strange, these first steps toward reclaiming the woman I had been before all the emotional weight of family had piled on my shoulders. But they were necessary. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in the living room with a cup of tea, the sun streaming in through the windows. I was staring out into the garden, but my mind wasn't on the flowers or the roses Harold had planted so many years ago. I was thinking about the future, my future. It had been a long time since I'd allowed myself to think about it. The realization hit me gently, like a soft wave at the shore. I didn't have to wait for anyone anymore. I didn't have to build my life around others' needs and desires. For the first time, I could build it around me. That evening, Tyler called. His voice was steadier than it had been the last time we spoke. "Hey, Mom," he said, his tone light but with an undercurrent of something deeper. "I'm doing some thinking, and I want to come over tomorrow. I've got something I need to talk to you about." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know what he was going to say, but I could hear the change in him, the sense of clarity that had been missing for so long. "Of course," I said, my voice steady. "Come over whenever you're ready." The next day, Tyler showed up around noon. He looked a little worn, but he had a determined set to his jaw, a look of someone who was ready to make peace with what had happened. He sat down across from me, his hands clasped together in front of him. "I talked to Laura," he began, his voice low. "And I'm done. I can't keep living a lie. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. I'm moving out for good, and I'm ready to rebuild." I felt a rush of emotion flood through me, relief, pride, sadness. This wasn't how I had imagined it would happen, but in the end, it was exactly what he needed. "You don't have to apologize, Tyler," I said, reaching out to take his hand. "I'm proud of you. And I know it's not easy, but this is your life. You have the power to shape it. I'm here for you." Tyler smiled, the first real smile I had seen from him in a long time. "Thanks, Mom. I don't know where this will take me, but I know I'm on the right path now." I squeezed his hand, feeling that familiar connection between us return, and for the first time in a long while, I truly felt like everything might just be okay. It had been several months since Tyler left Laura, since the weight of everything shifted, and we began to rebuild what had been broken. The house had changed, not just physically, but emotionally. The silence that once loomed over the rooms now felt like a space to breathe, to reflect, to start anew. There were still quiet moments of longing, days when I missed the simplicity of family gatherings, when I ached for the closeness that had once been there. But there was also something else now, something stronger: peace. I had learned a lot during these past few months. More than I had in the years leading up to this moment. I had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about learning to live with it, to find strength in the scars, to move forward without pretending everything was okay. It wasn't easy, but it was real. Tyler had moved into his own place, a small apartment in town, one he had picked out himself. It wasn't much, but it was his, and that, more than anything, gave me hope. He was finding his footing again, carving out a life that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. He had called me one evening, his voice full of excitement as he told me about the furniture he had bought, the plans he had for his new space. "It's not much," he had said, "but it's mine. And that feels pretty damn good." Hearing those words from him made everything I had done worthwhile. The confrontation with Laura, the distance we had put between us. It had all been hard, but it had brought us here, and I was proud of him, proud of the man he was becoming. As for me, I had finally embraced what it meant to live for myself. No longer defined by the roles I had played for so long, I had found a sense of independence I never thought I would reclaim. I had started volunteering at a local shelter, helping others who had found themselves isolated and alone. I spent more time with the friends I had neglected for too long, rebuilding those connections and finding joy in the small moments. I even started taking up painting, something I had always wanted to try but never made time for. My days were full, but they were mine, not filled with expectations or the need to please anyone else. I found myself finally able to let go of Harold's things. I had held on to them for so long, unwilling to move on, unwilling to accept that he was gone. But one afternoon, while sorting through some of his old shirts, I felt a sense of clarity. It was time. It was time to make space for myself, for my own life, and for what came next. I donated most of his clothes, keeping only a few small mementos, the things that truly held the essence of who he was. The house was quieter now, but it felt more like home. It was mine. I had worked for it. I had built it with my own hands and my own heart. And it wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of everything I had survived, everything I had learned. Tyler came over one weekend, bringing his new girlfriend, Sarah. She was kind, soft-spoken, and clearly cared for him in a way that made my heart ache in the best possible way. I could see how far he had come, and I was grateful for the path that was unfolding before him. The road to healing had been long and winding, but we had both made it to the other side, and I could feel the warmth of our bond returning. It was slow, steady, but real. I sat in my favorite chair by the window, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the house in a warm golden light. My garden was in full bloom, and the roses Harold had planted all those years ago were thriving. They had endured the seasons, just as I had. They were a reminder of what could be rebuilt, what could be nurtured from the past. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And for the first time in a long time, I was at peace with my legacy. I wasn't alone, and I would never be again.